Well, today we're in chapter 32, and we're going to learn the infinitive. If you can get this, you're pretty much home free. Wow, slight overstatement, but you're a good way there. All right. What's an infinitive? Well, an infinitive is a verbal noun. A participle is a verbal adjective. The infinitive is a verbal noun. In other words, however you form an infinitive and however you're going to translate an infinitive, you need to remember first and foremost that it is performing a substantival function. It's a verbal noun. And so in English we would say, to study is my highest aspiration. Well, we'll just pretend it is. To study is an infinitive. You form an infinitive in English by taking a verb and putting the word to in front of it. But you can see in this sentence that to study, there's your infinitive, is performing what function in the sentence? It's a subject, isn't it? If you were to say, I began to sweat when the teacher walked by. To sweat is another substantival function. It's completing the idea of the verb, isn't it? I began what? Well, I began to sweat. My favorite hobby is to eat. To eat is performing what function in the sentence? It's a predicate nominative, isn't it? So an infinitive, what we form in English with to and the verb, is performing basic substantival functions. When we get into Greek, same thing. Infinitives are verbal nouns. They are indeclinable. Yay! No case, no number. Now, sometimes there's an article attached to an infinitive, and when there is, it's always neuter. Now, that's not always the case, but when there is an article, the infinitive is viewed as a neuter construction. But basically, it's indeclinable. And the normal way to translate them in Greek is simply to say to and the verb. Now, we're going to have to fine-tune that a bit, but for the most part, when you see an infinitive, you'll say to and then take the meaning of the verb and stick it after it. So it's not that hard for the most part. But we're outside of the indicative verbal system, so guess what went bye-bye? No time at all. The only significance is aspect. And there's three infinitives because there's three aspects. So the infinitive that's built on the present tense stem is going to be indicating a continuous action. The infinitive built on the aorist tense stem is indicating an undefined action. And the infinitive built on the perfect tense stem is indicating a completed action. Now what you're going to find is that it's almost impossible to bring the present tense nuance, the continuous aspect, into English. Very rarely is this done, but that's why we have preachers. I have tried and tried and tried to find a way to simplify infinitives. In other words, to not have you simply to memorize things. I can't find it. Maybe someday someone will come up with one. But this is one of the few paradigms that you're simply going to have to learn. These are all the infinitive morphemes with the tense formatives. It's kind of important to see the tense formatives. Now, there is some consistency, isn't there? What do most of the infinitives end in? Yeah, alpha iota. And you'll notice that in the present and in the perfect, the middle and passive are the same form. You would expect that just from the tense system, though, right? So you have ein, esthai, and esthai. If it's a first aorist, you have psi, sasthai, and thenai. If it's a second aorist, you'll notice in the active and middle, it's going to look just like a present. The stem will be different, though. Ein and esthai. But when you get into the passive, you have the ani. There's the eta of the tense formative. And in the perfect, you have kenai, and then sthai, sthai. You're just going to have to commit this to memory as far as I can tell. The problem is, I could say, well, if it ends in alpha iota, it's probably an infinitive. But the problem is, sometimes these forms can they kind of get buried down in a verse, and they won't stand out as much to you that it's an infinitive, and you can get lost. So you just need to memorize this. So let's just quickly play our little guessing game. If you saw lambanein, what tense is that? It has to be the present, right? Because that's the present tense stem of the word lambano. So you would parse this as a present active infinitive from lambano, meaning to receive. Lusai is an aorist active infinitive from luo, meaning to loose. You notice what's missing? Augment, right. We're outside the indicative system. There's no augments in the aorists. Luesthai, present, middle or passive infinitive from luo, and these we just generally translate in our parsings as passives, to be loosed. Labain, right, there's your aorist, but you have the lab stem, the mu alpha nu is gone, you're outside the present system. Without the augment, you know you're in the aorist, so it's an aorist active infinitive from lambano, translated to receive. In other words, lambanein and labain are generally going to be translated the same way. I mean, if you want to distinguish the present, you can do it something like to continue to receive, which is what it means. That's just horrid English. Leleukenai, perfect active infinitive from luo, to have loosed. It's pretty straightforward. Once you know your endings, now that you're used to putting verbs together, it'll make pretty good sense. Just real quickly so you can actually see the endings hooked on the paradigmatic forms. The present infinitive, luein, luesthai, and luesthai. The aorist infinitive. In the active, it's the first aorist stem, it's lusai. If it's a second aorist stem, it's labain. In the middle, lusasthai, labesthai. And in the passive, it's luthenai, graphenai. It's just so much more fun in Greek not to memorize all these paradigms, but rather be able to see how pieces fit. And what you're doing now is you're really enjoying the benefit of the way I've been teaching you. Because instead of just learning forms, it's all making sense, or at least some sense, in how it all goes together. And in the perfect or the completed infinitive, leleukenai, lelusthai, lelusthai. Okay, so how is an infinitive used in Greek? Let me give you just the three main ones. The textbook gives you a few more. The most basic function of the infinitive is as a straight substantive. So if you saw ta esthein estin agathon, it'd be to eat is good. I must have been hungry when I made these slides. That's the most basic form. The second use, though, is probably the most common, what we call the complementary infinitive. And all that this does is that there are certain verbs that are not complete in and of themselves in terms of their meaning. And so they have to be followed by an infinitive in order to make sense. So, for example, de, which means it is necessary, exestin, which means it is lawful, and melo, which means I am about. None of those verbs make sense without something to complete their thought, and Greek uses the infinitive to complete their thought. These are the really easy infinitives to translate. So, de autein esthein, it is necessary for her to eat. It is lawful for him to eat. I am about to eat. Okay, you see how the infinitive, it's just natural to use the infinitive in Greek and in English in this case. The third use is called the articular use of the infinitive, and this is the one that might cause a little bit of problem if you don't recognize what's going on. Actually, it's not the articular use, it's the articular with a preposition. Here's what happens. When you have one of these 6 constructions where you have a preposition and your definite article, which will be neuter, and an infinitive, and normally a word in the accusative. Okay, that's the construction right there. This is a special kind of idiom in Greek, and it kind of defies some of the rules you're used to. And so on your vocabulary cards, you need to make 6 separate vocabulary cards for these 6 constructions. That's how important it is to recognize these. Here's what's happening. When you have, for example, dia, normally dia with the accusative is on account of. That's not what it means in this construction. When you have dia followed by the articular infinitive, it means because. Now here's the other kind of interesting twist. See auton in the accusative? That's acting as if it were the subject of the infinitive. So if you saw dia ta blepe auton, you would translate it because he sees. Now this is an idiom. We don't have the same construction in English, and so you have to flex a bit in the translation. So dia with the articular infinitive means because, and the word in the accusative is acting as a subject of the infinitive, and so it's because he sees. Eis ta blepe auton, eis with the articular infinitive means in order that he sees. Pros also means in order that with the articular infinitive, in order that he sees. You can see the problem, can't you? The because and the in order that are definitions that we attach to the prepositions only when they are followed by the articular infinitive. You also have 3 temporal prepositions, and these are a little more apparent. Pra means before, en means when or while, and meta means after. So it's before he sees, while he sees, after he sees. Now you notice the case of the article is changing depending upon what? The preposition, isn't it? So the preposition is still governing the case of its object. Here in this case, it's the article. Before he sees, while he sees, after he sees. Okay, so these are a special idiom in Greek. They are the preposition with the articular infinitive, and you're going to have to be a little looser in your translation.